Two things that I know to be true. Number one, wide receivers get traded all the time in the NFL. And number two, the Bills need help at receiver. We're going to explore wide receiver trade options for the Bills today on Locked On Bills.
You are Locked On Bills, your daily Buffalo Bills podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Bills Mafia? It's Joe Marino, author of the Herd Mentality Substack, co-host of the Locked On NFL Scouting Podcast, co-host of the NFL First Read Podcast, and I'm your host of Locked On Bills. Locked On Bills is a proud part of the Locked On Podcast Network, now the number one sports podcast network. Want to thank you for making Locked On Bills your first listen every day, and a big welcome and shout out to our everydayers. You know who you are. Those of you who never miss a single episode, I appreciate y'all being here very, very much. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Use your profit boost on an NBA future and get entered for your chance to win a trip to the NBA Finals. Play your game with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Well, folks, welcome in. We're going to talk about 10 different receivers that the Buffalo Bills could explore trading for this offseason. And these players are commonly mentioned as trade candidates. So it's not like I just pulled these out of nowhere. These are commonly discussed players that could be on the move at the wide receiver position this offseason. And as I said in the cold open, wide receivers get traded in the NFL all the time, way more than any other position. And, well, the Buffalo Bills just happen to have a pretty big need at wide receiver. So we're going to go through 10 different players. We'll discuss their age, the cap implications, why that player could be traded, why the Bills should consider it, why they shouldn't, and then just ultimately where I stand on the idea. So let's do it. Let's get into a very common one, and that is A.J. Brown from the Philadelphia Eagles, who turns 29 in June. And if the Bills were to trade for A.J. Brown, they would take on $7 million in cap space in 2026. So that's very reasonable. So why would A.J. Brown be traded? Well, things are bumpy in Philadelphia. I know they're 1 year removed from winning the Super Bowl, but this past season, things got a little dicey. They fired their offensive coordinator. They had a hard time hiring a new one. It's a little bumpy right now in Philly. Now, it's tricky for Philly from a cap perspective because they would take on a $43 million dead cap hit to trade A.J. Brown because he's technically entering year one of a 3-year, $96 million deal. But Philly has the opportunity to move on, get some assets. Maybe it's something they would consider. So why should the Bills consider this? Well, we've talked about this X receiver position in the Sean Payton offense, and A.J. Brown checks the box. He has elite play strength. He is outstanding with the ball in his hands. He can win above the rim. And he has elite production with, some different quarterbacks along the way. The skill set's very, very attractive. And it certainly fits what the Bills are kind of missing, what they need Keon Coleman to be. What are the concerns? Well, my biggest concern is the personality fit. He's a different kind of cat, right? I'm not going to say he's a locker room cancer or there's like character flags, but he definitely has a unique personality that you would want to feel comfortable inserting into your locker room. You want to make sure he fits. And then, how does he age? He does turn 29 in June. I don't think he's coming up on the end of being a super productive receiver, but I don't love thinking about how this type of skill set ages. I think a lot about Alshon Jeffrey. I think about Des Bryant. And when it comes for these big physical receivers. And so you'd be taking on this contract where you'd have, 3 years of control. Are you comfortable with how he's going to age? So what's the bottom line here? I'm intrigued, especially because you're probably bringing him on for a couple of seasons. So you get ahead of the regression, I think. And if you are concerned about the personality, I think he's going to be on good behavior for the first couple of years. So I think that makes it easier to consider. So I'm definitely intrigued. I'm not sitting here saying the Bills should move heaven and earth to get A.J. Brown, but I'm not as moved off the idea as maybe I was a few weeks ago when you just kind of spitball and think about things, had a chance to really consider. I think he's going to have a good chance of being traded. He's a skill set the Bills could use. There's been elite production. Like if you want blue chip elite talent, like here you go, it's A.J. Brown. They don't just grow on trees. So I'm intrigued. Let's talk about the next receiver, and that's Brian Thomas Jr. from the Jacksonville Jaguars. He turns 24 in October. The Bills would be taking on $2.1 million in 2026 salary cap. So why would the Jaguars want to trade Brian Thomas Jr.? Well, I think first of all, he really fell down the pecking order in terms of who they're throwing the football to. He had the big rookie season. And then, of course, there's a new coaching staff year 2. And they traded for Jacoby Myers. And over the last 8 games of the season, Jacoby Myers was the most targeted receiver they had with 55. Then it was Parker Washington with 43. Then it was Brenton Strange with 35. And then it was Brian Thomas Jr. with 29 targets. I mean, he's the 4th option in the passing game. So that's a good place to start. And then number 2, he wasn't drafted by this general manager. That is always really relevant. If you study team building across the NFL, general managers move off of players that they didn't bring into the organization. And that's just the case with Brian Thomas Jr. So not only was he not brought in by this coach or GM, he was their 4th receiver. So that's why this is a possibility. Why should the Bills consider trading for Brian Thomas Jr.? Well, he's gifted. He's young. He gives you exciting vertical receiving skill, something that I've obviously preached a lot about the Bills needing to add. He had an outstanding rookie season, over 1,200 yards. And Mac Jones was the quarterback for a good amount of that. And so it's pretty clear why the Bills should be interested here. What are the concerns? Well, there are lowlights on film with Brian Thomas Jr. There are some football character things that you just don't love, whether it's maybe some effort stuff, short arming a ball, not wanting to take a hit. Like that stuff's on tape. You probably want a 6'2", 210-pound receiver to be a little bit more physical. And he's still got to develop his route tree. He's linearly explosive. There's no question. But he's got to add some branches to the route tree, become a little bit more of a complete player. So what's the bottom line here? Well, first of all, I think it's a realistic possibility. I think you can get him on a discount. I have strong reason to believe the Bills tried to trade for him at the deadline. You get 2 years remaining on his rookie deal plus the 5th-year option. Like, this is pretty attractive. And I don't know that it's going to cost you heaven and earth here, like maybe it would have at the deadline or coming out of his rookie season, because the dynamics that I outlined are very true. So Brian Thomas Jr., I think it's realistic. It's intriguing. I'm not moving heaven and earth, but I wouldn't be upset if Brian Thomas Jr. was wearing a Bills uniform next year. Let's talk about Marvin Harrison Jr. from the Cardinals. He turns 24 in August. The Bills would not be taking on much, and about $4 million in 2026, 5.7 in 2027. So why would the Cardinals be looking to trade Marvin Harrison Jr., who they just picked extremely high in the draft? Well, ultimately, he hasn't taken off, right? He hasn't, in 2 seasons, showcased the reasons they picked him so high. And simultaneously, Michael Wilson, who was not a premium investment, became a really high impact player for them this year. They had Trey McBride and Michael Wilson both over 1,000 receiving yards in 2025. There's a new coaching staff, not a new GM though. So Monty Ossenford, who drafted him, is still the GM, but there's a new coaching staff. So you just kind of look at this as an opportunity to maybe transition. High pick, hasn't taken off, has been surpassed by a lower investment. All right, new coaching staff. That's why this is on the table. So why should the Bills consider this? Well, Marvin Harrison Jr. is crazy talented. I thought he was the best prospect in that draft 3 years ago. And you get a chance to maybe buy low there, geez. I'd be excited about the potential of that return for a guy that turns 24 in August. Of course, his father, Marvin Harrison Sr., an unbelievable player in the National Football League. And you should have a pretty good read on Marvin Harrison because you have Drew Terrell as your receivers coach, who was Marvin Harrison's receiver coach the last 2 years in Arizona. So you should have a pretty good feel for his makeup. And if truly just changing teams would unlock, the full skill set of Marvin Harrison Jr., the impact that they were looking for when they drafted him. So what are the concerns? Well, the concerns are the reasons he's potentially a trade target. It's that he hasn't taken off and he's been surpassed by lower investments. And, Marvin Harrison, in terms of the Cardinals, they would have to take on an $11 million dead cap hit in 2026. So you probably get excited about, maybe you can, buy at a discount here. Well, that's the dead cap Arizona would have to eat, is something meaningful. So bottom line here is I'm super interested. I'd think about pick 26. I'd think about sending them pick 26 and getting Marvin Harrison and seeing what that looks like. I'm a big fan. I think he's got a lot of potential. I don't really look at Arizona the last few years and believe it was a great place for everyone to be the best version of themselves. 24 years old. Come on down. I think that's a heck of a skill set that would fill the X receiver role. He's got verticality. He's a stud football player. And I think it's just about getting it out of him, and maybe he needs a change of scenery. So does pick 26 and Keon Coleman get you Marvin Harrison? Because I'd probably do that. All right, coming up next, there's a receiver that Pete Carmichael is very, very familiar with. Carmichael's the Bills' offensive coordinator. We'll explore that and more next. Folks, be sure to stick with me. Tax season doesn't have to take over your life. This year, TurboTax is making it easier than ever to just hand things off and move on with your day. With TurboTax Full Service, you can have your taxes done for you by a trusted local expert, start to finish, without the stress or guesswork. Instead of spending hours trying to figure out forms, you can meet with a local TurboTax expert in person or connect online. They'll handle everything from W-2s to self-employed forms and work to get you every deduction. You can upload your documents, go about your day, and get updates right in the TurboTax app. It's a huge time saver and gives real peace of mind knowing an expert is handling it. For a limited time, you can have your taxes done by a local TurboTax expert for just $150 all in if a TurboTax expert didn't file for you last year. Just file by February 28th. Take taxes off your plate and get back to your life. Visit turbotax.com/local to book your appointment today. All right, we got more receivers. I said we were covering 10. We've only done 3, so that means 7 more to go. Next up, let's talk Chris Olave from the Saints. He turns 26 in June. The Bills would take on a $15.5 million 2026 cap hit. That's the 5th-year option. So we've talked a lot about 5th-year options. They are fully guaranteed, but the Bills could bring on Chris Olave, and you'd absorb that $15.5 million, but you could do an extension, and then you push that $15.5 million into future years to make it a lower initial cap hit if that's what you chose to do. So why would he be traded? Well, the Saints could use assets, right? They are a team that is, always over the cap, and they can use some draft picks as they're kind of rebuilding with Kellen Moore as their head coach, and they got Tyler Shuck, their young quarterback. Could they look at this as an opportunity to clear cap, avoid a long-term commitment, and get assets? Maybe. I think it's possible. So why should the Bills consider trading for Chris Olave? Well, he's young and proven. Vertical receiver. He's the right type of guy that the Bills need. I don't know that he's going to be like exactly your X receiver, but he is every bit of the vertical field stretcher, get open, separation guy. He's had terrific production every year except for 2024 when he was only available for 8 games. And that's been through different coordinators and different quarterbacks. I think that's 3 coordinators and probably at least 3 quarterbacks where he's put up over 1,000 receiving yards. So I like the skill set. I like the player. I like the age. What are the concerns? Well, the concussions in 2024 were very concerning. He's been durable otherwise. And I'll say this, like, I don't think you make this type of trade for him with only 2026 in mind. There will be and have been players we've already discussed where it's really just you're thinking about 1 year. Now, this is a player that you would trade for. You'd probably give up your first round pick, and you would pretty much want to commit to a long-term deal to help yourself with the cap flexibility. So are you cool with that? I think what's helpful there is Pete Carmichael, the Bills offensive coordinator, was part of the Saints for Chris Olave's first 2 seasons in the NFL. That should give you some very good intel about what Olave can offer and just how viable the commitment is here. But I'd be a big fan. I like Chris Olave a ton, and I think he could come in and provide the field stretcher that this offense needs. Let's talk Jalen Waddle of the Miami Dolphins. He turns 28 in November. The Bills would take on $1.8 million in 2026. They take on $24 million in 2027. Why would he be traded? Well, clearly the Dolphins are rebuilding. They released Tyreek Hill and Bradley Chubb. They have a new regime, new head coach, new general manager. They are certainly in rebuild mode. And would a player that turns 28 in November really be able to truly factor into you kind of getting into years of contending? Is your best way to get the most out of Jalen Waddle is for him to allow you to get other players? It's got to be something the Dolphins should be thinking about based on the state of, their organization, where they are in terms of the life cycle, year 1 of a rebuild. And that phrase I keep going back to, Jalen Waddle was not drafted by the current general manager. And so you could always feel like those are the types of players that could be on the move. So why should the Bills consider trading for Jalen Waddle? Well, he's a proven complete wide receiver that has speed and vertical elements to his game. You've seen Jalen Waddle stretch the field and win vertically. You've seen him win in the intermediate. You've seen him be a volume target that can take the short stuff and create after the catch. He's a very complete player. That's proven. He's still fairly young, and would certainly be a skill set that I think this offense could certainly use. What's the concern? Well, it's an in-division trade. Those are always very difficult. And I am sure Green Bay would want 2027 draft capital. Or excuse me, the Dolphins would want 2027 draft capital. And do you really want to give Miami meaningful 2027 draft capital while they're searching for a quarterback to help with that? I don't know if you want to, because here's what it comes down to. I'm optimistic about the Bills. I am. I think the Bills, I'll probably pick them to win the division. I think they'll probably win 11, 12 games, something like that. But you are lying to yourself if you think that there's not a world where the Bills could fall off this year. And, new coaching staff, transitioning the defense, a lot of needs, a lot of new. You saw it happen with the Ravens. You saw the Chiefs have down year. Like it can happen. The Bills have won a playoff game every year for 6 years in a row. That's not normal. Only 4 teams have ever done that in the history of the NFL. Josh Allen is the quarterback in the league with the longest consecutive start streak by far. Is that good? That means he's never going to get hurt, or does that mean he's due? Like, I don't know. You could talk me into either piece. You would hate to hand the Miami Dolphins a high pick in 2027. If they want the 2026 first round pick, number 26 overall, take it. Sure, we'd love to give you that for Jalen Waddle. Probably cost you a little change as well. But if they're pushing for that 2027 first, I don't know if I'd do it. So that's really the bottom line. I'd love to get Waddle, but I'm not giving Miami my 2027 first-round pick. Let's talk Quentin Johnston of the Chargers. He's 25 years old, or he'll turn 25 in September. The Bills would take on $2.7 million in 2026 cap space, and then they'd have to make a choice on Johnston's fifth-year option for 2027, which would be right at about $16 million. Why would he be traded? Well, not the GM that drafted him in place with the Chargers, and they're probably reluctant about committing long-term. They have to make the decision on the fifth-year option by May, and they have Ladd McConkey, and they drafted Trey Harris in the second round, who flashed as a rookie. They have Rodney Gatson. This might not be a player that they look at as one that they want to pay while they have these other young players also emerging. So why should the Bills consider trading for Quentin Johnston? Well, he's height, weight, speed guy, gives you that vertical element, explosive, big play potential. He's still young. And he's also a player that you could look at as that possibility of recouping what you give for him. So if you were to trade for Quentin Johnston, let's say you give a fourth-round pick or a third-round pick for Quentin Johnston, and you don't pick up the fifth-year option. He has a pretty good year. He walks. He signs a decent deal in free agency, and now you're in position to kind of get that pick back through the compensatory formula. That's somewhat attractive as well. What are the concerns? Well, I think Quentin Johnston's been hot and cold, and you don't love that when you have a good quarterback in Justin Herbert. He's certainly not a do-everything receiver. He's, I think, generally underachieved so far in the NFL, although he was always kind of a project coming out of TCU in that offense. But the last couple of years have been a lot better for him, but I still think he's hot or cold. There are times where he is not a factor in games. So what's the bottom line here? I don't feel super eager to go get him, but for a modest trade, like if you gave up a 4 and you got to enjoy him for this year and then you do the compensatory thing, like, all right, there's some upside there. I can get down with that. All right, so there's Quentin Johnston. We've got more to do. 4 more receivers I want to cover, including the player that I think is the absolute dream. We'll do that here next, folks. Be sure to stick with me. Ever wanted to experience the NBA Finals live and in person? Well, FanDuel is giving you the chance to turn that dream into reality with their NBA sweepstakes. Here's how it works. Use your profit boost on any NBA future, and you'll automatically be entered for a shot to win an NBA Finals trip for 2. That's right, flights, tickets, the whole experience. If you're already looking at the board and thinking about which team can make a deep run, this is the perfect time to lock it in. I love futures this time of year, whether it's picking a team to win the championship or grab a conference title. It adds that extra layer of excitement to every game down the stretch. And now, not only can your pick cash, but it can send you to the finals. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Use your profit boost on an NBA future and get entered for your chance to win a trip to the NBA Finals. Play your game with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, 4 more receivers to get to. The next one is DJ Moore from the Bears. He turns 29 in April. The Bills would be taking on a $24.5 million cap hit in 2026, which is obviously huge. You wouldn't really want to live in that world where that's what he's expense against your books. So why would the Bears trade DJ Moore? Well, they have like new young players that they're throwing the football to. Colston Loveland, their first-round pick this past year. Rome Odunze, their first-round pick 2 years ago. Luther Burden was a high second-round pick. All of those players were similarly productive to DJ Moore. And so as your fourth one, you want to pay him this type of money when you got these young players. That's why they would want to trade him. Why would the Bills be interested? Well, he's a good player. He's versatile. He's a guy that I've always appreciated the fullness of his skill set, route running, yards after catch, verticality, speed. He's got physicality about him. He's a fun football player. He's been durable too. Hasn't missed a game in 5 years. So last 5 years, he's played all 17 games in all 5 seasons. You love that. What are the concerns? Well, the contract, right? I think that might help actually lower the compensation. knowing what you have to absorb. So maybe you were able to get him for like a 4th-round pick or something like that because of what you have to take on. So the bottom line here on DJ Moore is that I'm down for this idea if the money piece makes sense, where, the Bills cannot take on a player that they're going to commit $24.5 million of cap space to. So you have to make that work. And if that is logical, all right, DJ Moore can help this football team. You pair DJ Moore with a 1st or 2nd round pick at receiver, you feel like you've really elevated your weaponry for Josh Allen. All right, let's talk about a few more players. Michael Pittman Jr. From the Colts. Let's discuss him. Recently rumored by The Athletic that he could be on the move. Also, Greg Rosenthal talked about this as well. So maybe you're thinking, Joe, Michael Pittman, why are you talking about him? Well, serious people in the league are talking about it. All right, so he turns 29 in October. The Bills would take on $24 million in a cap hit in 2026. So obviously you're going to want to be flexible with that. Why would the Colts trade Michael Pittman? Well, it's a little bit like the conversation we had about DJ Moore, where they have Tyler Warren at tight end. They've got Josh Downs, a good-looking young receiver. They're paying Jonathan Taylor. Maybe they want to bring back Alec Pierce, who's been really good for them. They've got a couple starters on their offensive line that are expiring contracts. And they have a lot of stuff to figure out here. The quarterback position. And so maybe they want some of that cap flexibility to move on from Michael Pittman. I think it would, for them, open up like $20 million in cap space. So why should the Bills do this? Well, Michael Pittman's a stud. He's an ideal X receiver. He's quarterback proof. He's been productive with so many different quarterbacks. He's a good football player. What are the concerns? Well, he hasn't really missed games, but he's had to play through some tough injuries, including a low back fracture in 2024 that he was cleared to play with in 2025, but had to manage it. He's had some concussions. Again, hasn't really missed a ton of time, but you're kind of mindful of this low back injury. And, if there's any long-term issues, I've heard there's some management with it, and that's, it's a little scary. The bottom line here for me is that it's very intriguing. You want to be comfortable with the medicals, and the money part is tricky because you're just not taking on a player that's going to count $24 million against your 2026 cap. So you'd have to feel comfortable with where you took that contract. Let's talk about a couple more players. Jordan Addison from the Vikings next. He just turned 24 in January. The Bills would take on $2.6 million in 2026 cap. And then you have a choice on the 5th-year option, which for 2027 would be $17.6 million. Well, why would he be traded? Well, first of all, the Vikings are over the cap. They got a lot to figure out with their books, but, Addison's been a headache. Now, let me kind of walk through some of his off-the-field issues. In July 2023, he was cited for reckless driving after being caught going 140 miles an hour in a 55-mile-an-hour zone. In July 2024, he was arrested on 2 counts of driving under the influence. He agreed to a plea deal with a wet reckless charge, and he was suspended for the first 3 games of the season. In 2025, he was suspended by the team in the first quarter of the Week 5 game in London for missing a walkthrough. And then in January 2026, he was arrested on trespassing charges at a casino in Florida. Those charges were dropped a week later. But there's just been a lot of stuff here, right? And so he's young, but there's been a lot of stuff here. So why should the Bills trade for Jordan Addison? Well, it's the skill set, right? He's a really dynamic route runner that can win at multiple levels of the field. He's young. He's talented. The concerns, well, you heard what I just said, right? And I think the Vikings want to commit to him? Would any team want to commit to him knowing, where the red flags have been? It's very concerning. So if you get him on the cheap and you think, okay, we can do this for 1 year, it's Keon and some change for Jordan Addison. All right. But I struggle with really giving up a meaningful asset here, knowing what this dude's been doing off the field. And, if you're going to bring on players, these guys got to be reliable. And I'd be nervous about where his off the field decision-making has led him. The last player I want to talk about is very unlikely, but this is the dream. This is the guy. It's Garrett Wilson from the Jets. Turns 26 in July. The Bills would be taking on $3.3 million in 2026, $14.5 million in 2027. Why would he be traded? That's a great question. I mean, I think he's a blue chip receiver. The Jets don't have anything going for them in terms of their roster. They have no clear path to a quarterback answer. They've been selling assets. They traded Sauce Gardner. They traded Quinnen Williams. They didn't trade Garrett Wilson. I'm sure they had the chance to. So I guess it would be the Jets just kind of looking at their situation and being very honest about how much they need to do and not believing that Garrett Wilson, who turns 26 in July, is going to be performing at a level that's going to be meaningful whenever they're able to really start contending. Why should the Bills consider trading for Garrett Wilson? Well, he's the perfect answer. Route running, verticality, yards after catch. He's young. He's a dude. Garrett Wilson's awesome. That's why the Bills should consider trading for him. The concern, well, it'd be costly. This would be a very expensive player to trade for. Probably be worth it. But you're also giving the Jets draft capital. Now, if they give you Garrett Wilson, I think you say, okay, sure, you can have this. But it would be costly for sure. The bottom line here, try to do it. I don't think the Jets would want to trade with you. And if Garrett Wilson were to be available, there'd be a lot of other teams that would want to acquire him. And I'm sure the Jets would be much more excited about sending him to a team not in their division. So I think it'd be tough. It's probably not realistic, but, you know, based on where the Jets are at, I couldn't help but putting him on the list. And I think you probably, I know maybe you're wondering, like, are you going to talk about Justin Jefferson? I don't know. Are the Vikings going to trade him? Like, that's probably a couple of first-round picks. Do you want to trade 2 first-round picks? Of course, I'd love to have Justin Jefferson, but that's a tricky conversation, and I'm not really convinced that the Vikings are going to move on there. Where, you know, and I said the same thing about Garrett Wilson. I'm not sure, but they've at least had a pattern lately of selling off assets. But everybody that I talked about today was like very much, these are like reasonable players that there's a level of expectation that they could be traded. And so we got into them here today on this episode. I certainly hope you enjoyed. We got more to talk about, obviously. The focus of today's discussion was receivers that the Bills could trade for, but there are free agent receivers that the Bills wouldn't have to trade for. So we'll start to explore some of them on our next conversation. So come on back for that. Don't miss anything. Make sure you're subscribed. Would love it if you took a second to rate, review, and share the podcast. Have a great rest of your day. Go Bills. And I look forward to catching up with you again real soon.